Welcome back. It's another episode of the Better Learning Podcast. My name is Kevin Stoller, host of the show, and I'm joined today with Heidie Saselski, who is superintendent of Fenton Area School District in Michigan. And we always want to have different perspectives, especially what current superintendents are going through, because a lot of the times in our industry, we talk about everything that's going on, but the superintendents know firsthand exactly what they're dealing with. So Heidie, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, it's always good, and I know your time is precious. So I really want to recognize that superintendents are getting pulled 100 different directions, and it's usually not always the things that they want to be working on.
True, very true. But this is exciting. This is new, so that's exciting, and it's the end of the day. So I'm happy to give you some time.
Perfect. So I thought it would be good to start out hearing what was school like for you as you were coming up through as a kid. What was that experience like?
So I grew up in a small little hill town, kind of north of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So I grew up in a very kind of small town. It's very hill country, so it was a great place to grow up. Had a very strong force of a mother. My mom and dad divorced when I was very, very young, but from a very large family. So I was the youngest of 6 girls. And my mom was just a force. And school for us was, there was never any question that you go to school and you get good grades. That was always a requirement. And then it was never, it never entered our mind that we weren't going to go on, because she was somebody who didn't go on. She didn't have a college education. So I think she always knew that would be something that she would want for us. So, typical high school experience, was heavily involved in athletics.
Okay. Which sports?
Basketball, volleyball, and softball were my 3 sport athletes. I was a 3-sport athlete until my senior year. And then I had signed a volleyball scholarship to go play volleyball in college. And so I did not play softball my senior year. So that was rough for my sister, who was actually my coach. So
really?
That I didn't play.
And what city north of Pittsburgh?
So Franklin, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
So it's in northwestern Pennsylvania. So it's in the Allegheny foothills. At the Allegheny River, which dumps into downtown Pittsburgh, runs right through my hometown. So grew up there on the river quite a bit, and it was it's a fun place to grow up. And I am a proud Steelers fan in my family. You don't have a choice. So I still love to root for the Steelers all the time, and so do my kids. So even though they were raised in Michigan,
I'm a little bitter about the Steelers right now. So I grew up in Chicago, and then I went to school at Miami University in Ohio. And when Ben Roethlisberger was drafted, the Steelers became my number 2 team.
Yeah.
So I followed them for a long time. And now I feel like the same thing is happening here as the Bears just traded Justin Fields.
Yes, they did.
Yes. And I followed Ohio State, and I was mad. I'm mad at the Bears and why they did that. I still don't understand it. So I think I'm going to have to be like Steelers, following the Steelers again.
Well, we were on the receiving end of a good deal. So I will say that we're in Steeler country is very happy to have 2 competent quarterbacks.
Yeah, that's right.
That's very cool. And we loved Ben. So
I know. That was one of those where you just saw, like, the second he was a college quarterback, you're like,
100%.
There's something special here. Yeah.
Yep, for sure.
So you being an athlete, at what point in high school were you thinking like athletic scholarship, or were you thinking I need to keep, like, where the academics versus the athletics, where it was, like today it's a little different on how, like, the focus of like one sport, like what was the mindset for you at that time?
I think in high school, I think the mindset looking back was I got good grades because they were required of me, right? My mom kind of required a bare minimum. And so And then I got good grades to play sports. I got good grades um, to kind of keep doing the things in the part of school that I loved. Did I love sitting in my geometry class or my algebra 2 class? Not so much. But I knew it was almost like a means to an end. Like I knew I had to get to that point so that I could go do the things that I wanted to do. And so I knew fairly early on that I wanted to play sports in college just because I just kind of grew up around sports all the time and I just loved it. Like it was one thing. I was a pretty hyper kid, still am a pretty hyper person. And it was just something that I excelled at and I always got that high through it. So that was the kind of self-confidence that gave me the chance. And at the time there wasn't a lot of female sports offerings. So I didn't get to play when I played softball. I started in baseball. So I played in minor league and little league with boys, right? So that it was, and I was fairly good, so it was my chance to kind of show that I could be just as good as the boys. And it was a huge confidence builder for me. So I knew at a fairly young age, probably my sophomore year, I knew I had something with volleyball. I was fairly competitive in basketball too. I would have said that's where I probably was going to head. But then I just fell in love with volleyball. So
awesome. So at what point then did your focus career-wise realize like I'm going to go education route?
Yeah.
Was it on the radar at all?
It was not. Like I said, I'm the youngest of 6 and 2 of my sisters went into education. The other sister went into psychology and ended up working in education. So I was bound and determined I was not going to follow in their footsteps. I was not going to be a teacher. I was not going to have anything to do with education. And then I was undecided my first year in college. And then my second year, I decided, okay, I think I'm going to declare pre-law because I really had this idea that I wanted to be a lawyer. And then when I looked to see what my student loan debt was current then, and then what it would be after law school, I was like, I don't know if I want to do that. So, and my sister, who's closest to me, she's a teacher. And I had worked with her at some summer camps for some disabled students. But I did the sports part, right? Just because that was kind of my gig. But I think she saw in me something that was good with kids. And so she said, just take an education course. Just take one to see if you like it. But take one where you're going to be in a classroom. Don't take a theory or don't take any of that. Take an education course where you have to go in and work with kids and just see if you like it. So the first course I took a practicum course, which, you have to do field service hours. So it's not like student teaching, but you have to go in and observe in a classroom and you have to do certain things. And I loved it. And it was the college that I went to, it was in Erie, Pennsylvania. And at the time they had urban education grants. And so we got to go into urban settings and do some really cool things with their after school programming. The program that I volunteered in was literally minor detention facility taking classes at night. So these were kind of kids that had been convicted of crimes and they were still needing to be educated. So I walked through a metal detector, like not a smart move for looking back, I would never recommend that for a kid thinking about going into education. Hey, do this really intense experience first. But I think I thrive on those situations sometimes. And it was the perfect thing for me. Fell in love with it. And then at that point declared education and then didn't look back. Got my teaching degree there and met my husband, who was not my husband at the time, but I met him in college. And he's originally from this area. And so I graduated first. He had to go back and do his student teaching. And so I came here in Michigan and got a teaching job after I graduated in 1997. So I started teaching in 97. And
what were you teaching?
I was teaching high school English. Okay. So I was an English teacher and I taught my first year. I taught, your introductory lit and comp class, your 9th grade, kind of. That's what everybody has to go through that hazing period when you were a young teacher where you get all the courses that nobody else wants to teach. So I got that, and I got thrown a bone. I got thrown creative writing and a couple other fun electives. And then I just kind of got my groove. I kind of got, they got to see that I was fairly decent at the job. So I got some other cool courses, and my specialties were always the semester, senior, junior, and senior level courses that were, I took on a lot of preps just because I loved the variety of it. And I loved it. I started teaching in Owasso, Michigan, which is in between Flint and Lansing.
Okay.
And that's where I spent my teaching career until I became an administrator. And at that point, I think 6 years after, I knew after the first year, oh my God, I want to be a principal. I want to.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. I want.
What was it that drew you to that?
I worked for a great guy, but he didn't want to sit in a room and talk about teaching and learning and student achievement and, how school culture was awesome and what we could do to, improve it. Like, he didn't want to talk the talk anymore. So I knew at that point that he was a good guy and I loved working for him, but I knew I wanted something different. I wanted to influence that whole culture.
Okay.
So I've always taken jobs to kind of increase my sphere of influence. That's a big thing for me, is anytime that I can take something on, how many kids and how many people am I going to influence in that for the positive and the growth. And so, I knew right away I wanted to be a building principal. I just knew, like, after the first year, I knew.
All right. So I'm going to ask you something. I'm going to come back to it. How would you have described yourself as an athlete?
Crazy. Highly competitive. Like, I just don't like losing. I just don't. I didn't then. I'm more gracious at it now because, of course, I've had people along the way to help me, but very competitive. Like, I like to win.
Okay. How about, like, as a teammate? Like, what would your teammates, how would they describe you?
In college, I think they would describe me as kind of the leader, the one that they look to kind of get the ship moving right back in the right direction, trying to get them to laugh a lot. Like, I like to have a good time too. So, that's how they would describe me. I think all of my high school friends that I played sports with would probably say she likes to laugh a lot, because I wasn't, I knew I was good, but I didn't really think that I needed to put the work ethic in until after I hit college, when everybody was just as good as me, if not better. So then you had to really work.
Okay.
And so that's how I probably would describe them.
Does it, now looking back at your career, did those characteristics also come across?
Oh yeah.
As a leader? And
100%. I tell my own kids this, if I didn't have the experiences that I had as an athlete, I would not be sitting in this chair today, because there were so many, small things that are setbacks of adversity that I had that prepared me very well for taking on big roles, and then having those setbacks and be able to problem solve and kind of get around it. That was just a brilliant training ground for being an educational leader. I truly think that was a huge component to me doing what I'm doing. I think I would have always ended up in education, but I think my college experience in athletics kind of really forged the idea that you wanted to be in charge, kind of, or you wanted your influence to be the one that everybody looks to.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. All right. Well, thanks. Because that's one of those things too. I always like, but especially when I find out that someone is an athlete, like in interviewing questions, as you describe that, and it usually does like transfer across. Like, were you the natural leader? Were you the one that just like outworked everyone? Or, like trying to figure, like for me, I was always like, I work in bursts. And it didn't hit me until later in my career. I'm like, oh, that's how I played basketball too. I would be like, for a lot of times you wouldn't even know I'm on the court. And then there'd be like a 2-minute spurt where maybe I get 12 points or something like that.
I think hard work, I probably am being a little modest, but my mom worked so hard just so hard. And so all of us, every single one of us just watched her work so incredibly hard that I think it wasn't ever, once you get into something, you work hard, right? I would say that my coaches would say I worked hard, but I really like to have a good time too. So, and I didn't take it as seriously. I don't think because I didn't have to, but once I hit college, I mean, I was in it to win it every single time I stepped on the court for sure.
So when you went into the principal role, then was that all? Were you in Fenton at that point, or
I was actually still in Owasso.
Okay.
So, yep. So about 6 years after teaching, an assistant principal role had opened up, and I went for it, and it would have been the first time a female held that position in that building. And so that was tough because they didn't see someone who, was just newly married, probably going to have kids. They could see how much I loved kids. They couldn't picture me in that role. And so I applied for it, interviewed for it, and I didn't get it. And I broke my heart. It broke my heart. It really did. So I had kind of made up my mind that I was going to be an administrator. So it was either going to be in Owasso or somewhere else. So the next year, the year after that, I got pregnant with my son. And so, I was teaching and I had maternity leave. I think I started maternity leave at the beginning of March and taught that whole year. And I had him in at the end of March, and then I was off until the school year, the next school year, because I had some maternity leave built up. And the other assistant principal role opened up. Somebody else had retired, and so they moved who they hired instead of me into that role. And so the role opened back up that I interviewed for. But funny story, the assistant principal who was at another building took the principal role. And so it was totally different leader, and she was a woman. So, and so when I interviewed the second time for the same position, I got it because I basically told her, listen, you're either going to get me now or you're not going to get me, because I know I'm going to get a job somewhere else. So I was that confident. But again, that the sports is what gave me that confidence. And she hired me, and it was a great position to kind of learn how to be a leader. I was in charge of all the discipline. I was in charge of driver's education and special education in our building at that time. And it's a great, great, great position to train and to try to be a leader, because you deal with a lot of different things. You're dealing with, budget stuff when it comes to driver's training and special education. And then you're dealing with compliance when it comes to, special education. And I did attendance as well. And then you're dealing with parents all the time, because you have kids that are just, having a hard time and acting out and, doing things that they shouldn't be doing. So you're constantly doing that. So it was a great position to train with. And I was in that position for like 6 years, 7 years. It changed here and there. I think they changed, our enrollment was going down. And so the building changed organizationally. And at one point they started to call my position co-principal with the other principal. And then we had an assistant principal that was an assistant and the athletic director. So it changed a little bit. But I knew I wanted to be a principal eventually, but I wanted another child. So, in that meantime, I had my daughter in that 6 years. And then she was 2 when I really kind of decided, okay, it's time to start applying. And I knew I couldn't be a principal in that building. I couldn't be the end all and be all, because I had been reared or brought up as an educator with most of them, right? We came in together. And so, some of them were my best, the people that I still talk with on a monthly basis. They're just good people. I didn't want to be the person to come down on them. I know I couldn't.
Yeah. So it's interesting you recognize that, because sometimes you see it does happen. Did you see that happen in other ones, or no other people being like, I saw them going from peer to now being leader of that.
It happened when I became an assistant principal. I mean, I had administrator stamped on my forehead everywhere I went, and every conversation that I had, I think they just didn't know what I would do and what I wouldn't do as an assistant principal. But when you're in charge of a building and you're in charge of getting people towards a certain direction, you can't have those friendly relationships interfere with, moving a building into kind of for the better. And I knew that just wasn't going to happen there. So I started to apply, and I got a call. Actually, I got a call on the job here in Fenton at the middle school. I got a job from the local superintendent. He's like, hey, they're looking for a middle school principal, and I think you'd be great for it. And so I said, oh, I got to get my name out there. So I'll start interviewing. And so I interviewed, I think I interviewed on a Thursday, and the superintendent at the time, her name was Peggy Yates. She called me Thursday night, offered me the job.
Oh, wow.
And she said, I need you in place by July 1. And this was like the last week of June or, so I was like, oh, so it was like a Band-Aid being ripped off. And so I called my superintendent at the time, who was brand new in the district in Owasso. And I just said, hey, listen, I got to take this opportunity. I can't not. It's a great district. It's a building that needs somebody like me. So I think it's a worthwhile opportunity. So I literally handed in my resignation on Monday, and then was approved by this board that Monday. So it was just, it happened very quickly, but it happened the way it should have, because I loved it out there, and I loved the people so much that if I had time to think about it, I probably wouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
The best decision I've ever made in my whole entire life, though, to come to this.
So what was that first year like then? So, because when you do that right away, it's like you're thrown in, and it's not like you've had time to like process and be like, all right, this is what I'm going to do, and this is how I'm going to build up the support.
Yeah, it was awesome. I loved it. I mean, it was a building that had some administrative turnover in the last probably 4 or 5 years before that. I think they had like 3 or 4 leaders at that point. So I know they needed somebody like me, because I'm somebody who really likes to bring people together and really likes to kind of not be to try to be the best building. Again, that's that competitive nature that I have. And so and I really wanted to turn them around, and they're great. They were great teachers. They were doing good things. They just, it was in disarray. They weren't all pointing in the right direction. And I have a tendency to kind of help people get pointed in the right direction. And so it was great. It was great. And that building, I mean, that's still, and, I'm the superintendent in the district now, and that, I thank that building all the time, because I just got a great welcome to this district from that building. So, yeah. And I was the middle school principal there for 7 years.
Okay.
And then we had a new superintendent who got hired, who kind of reorganized the district a bit and created an executive leader role, kind of like curriculum director, but also in charge of state and federal grants. Also in charge of kind of developing the Department of Teaching and Learning. We really didn't have a department at that time. And so I applied for that position and got that in 2018. And so from 2018 to 2022, that's what I did. Is I was the curriculum director, executive director of teaching and learning is what my title was. And then he decided he was going to retire and not be a superintendent anymore, or not retire, but kind of leave for a different position. COVID did a number on us, several superintendents, right? So
yes, it did.
He was just kind of done at that point. He didn't want to do it anymore. And he basically said, I think you should do it. And I really loved the best job I've ever had in education was the one I had before being a superintendent. It was like a worker bee. You got to do all the work and the stuff behind the scenes and not deal with any of the political garbage that we
right. Yeah.
You did, right?
All the things that would come.
Yeah. So it was the best.
When you took that, did you have thoughts, or was there a time where you were thinking, I want to get on the track to be a superintendent? Never. Okay.
Never aspired to be a superintendent.
Okay.
Ever. Like I knew when I was a teacher, I wanted to be a building administrator. Like I knew right away I wanted to be in charge I what I had seen of the superintendency, it was just too political. And I am a very upfront communicator, and I am a very kind of, you kind of see what you get. I'm not somebody who kind of can play the politic game very well. So I just never aspired for it. But I also didn't want to see all of the work that we had done in the last 5 or 6 years to be completely flipped around and somebody else taken in a different direction, right?
Right.
Because we
Mm-hmm.
were going in a really good direction. And so it was either, work for somebody that could possibly do that, or take the job yourself and deal with all the stuff you don't like about the position and try to make it your own. And so that's what I decided to do. I took it, and I'll tell you that that first year was rough.
Mm-hmm.
It was a rough year.
So you hit a couple components of, we're affiliated with this organization called Education Leaders Organization, ELO, which is this exclusive kind of confidential peer network for school superintendents. And the reason it even exists is a lot of things that we talked about, like even as a principal, how, like you can only kind of go a certain amount of your life that you can't share. You can share with some people, like, the middle 50%, where you can talk, you can talk generically about everything. Absolutely. And then you start going, be like, okay, we can talk a little bit more over here, a little bit more here, but there's still things that you can't share. And we talk about it's the top 5 and bottom 5% of your life that are really hard to share when you're in that leadership role. And it's hard, especially when you're like in the community, or, like your friends are parents of, like your kids, but they're 100%. Also, so having those outlets is really important. But what were the surprises for you? Like, now that you're a couple years into it, like what are the things that you thought you knew you would have to deal with, but now you're like, I just didn't expect it.
Yeah, right. Like, I really thought that I would have to be very intentional and very transparent about money. Like, here, we're going to spend X amount of $1 million on this. And so very transparent about those decisions and how that's done, and why we need to pass a bond, and being, very transparent about that. And having a hard time figuring out why people weren't so concerned about that, but they're concerned about how many transgendered students we actually have in a building. Like, they're more concerned about a political aspect or a view on they view on life, more than they're concerned about how I'm investing their tax dollars. Like, it was like the crazy idea of what matters to people was very, very eye-opening to me, because I really thought I'm fairly normal, I think I tend to think like a lot of other people. I mean, you can't pick a more centrist person than I am as far as like politics go. Like, there's definitely some things that I'm fairly conservative about, but there's also things that I'm just fairly, I would say liberal about, just because I'm a kid-centered person. So no matter how kids come to us or how they view themselves, we're going to take care of them as kids. So that was eye-opening to me, that people don't, there's some irrationality out there, big time.
Yeah. And I wonder how much that, and hearing you say that are like exact words that I talk about all the time. Like, actually, like our theme we talk about, radically student-centered, really started out first of being more of like radically centered, like right. We just saw what was going on in the schools and their culture, and it was just so hard to like fight through that, because the right and the left were just so loud.
Oh, just constantly.
And how do you stay radically centered? And then obviously we, in the work that we do, with the student-centered approach of like, how do we be like radically student-centered and not let kind of those cultural and political things really, I just, maybe I'm not old enough, or maybe I'm just not smart enough, but like, are we in just times that it's like really rare, or does this go on? Like, are we just repeating what other generations have been doing?
Being an English teacher, I think we're in different times, because I don't ever remember a time it's this political, right? And I see it getting a little bit better, as we were kind of moving away from, I think, the political election, or the presidential election, I should say. We were getting a little bit better, but I'm sure it's going to ramp back up again, because you have people who really feel strongly on very polar ends of the spectrum. And I think sometimes schools get thrown in the middle, which we're trying to avoid drastically. But sometimes you just feel like you get thrown into it no matter what.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, you chose to take this position after already seeing some of the political stuff, because I would have said, like 10 years ago, be like, oh, like schools are like the one place where like the community comes together, like they all want. And then obviously things changed. And I think COVID was probably the prompt that 100%. Changed it.
Yeah.
So in knowing that, and you still took the role, was there any like second guessing of like, is this really what I want to be doing?
Oh, for sure. For sure. I mean, the unique thing that I have too is my husband's a superintendent.
Oh, so really? Okay.
We're both superintendents. And so he was on one side saying, you'd be awesome. You should do it. You should do it. You should do it. And on the other side, I'm thinking, why would I sign myself up for that? I have a job that I love. I don't necessarily need that. I think truly, and I've said this, and I know this is hard, and I've learned to never say never. I'm not sure I could be a superintendent anywhere else, only because I love these people. I mean, I've been here for 14 years. I love the people that I work with and for. I know families that I've seen all 3 or 4. I have a family here that has 13 kids, and I've seen, 9 of their 13 go through now. So I'm not sure I could do this anywhere else. I love this place, and I do it primarily for the people and the kids. But I think if people think that this is a stepping stone for me to go to a bigger, or that's just not the case. That's not the case. I mean, this is probably my last stop in public ed. So
that's great. You love it. I'm going to challenge you on that.
Okay.
Because just hearing you talk already, I can tell it's like you're one of those people. And it reminded me of a story when we moved from Ohio to Arizona. One of my friends came up to me and started telling a story, and I didn't know where he was going with it, but he told me the story of a family that was moving to a new town, and they pull into a gas station in the town and go and talk to the attendant in the gas station. They're like, well, tell us, like, we're new to town. Like, what is it like? And the guy who was working at the gas station he goes, well, what was your old community like? And the guy goes, well, it's like, it wasn't very friendly. People, didn't really help neighbors out. They didn't, it was kind of everyone just stayed to themselves. And the guy at the gas station goes, yeah, he's like, I'm sorry to tell you, but like this town is just like that too. Yeah. And then another car comes in and they're moving in town, and same story. The guy goes in and says like, well, what's this town like? And the guy working at the gas station asked the same question. He's like, well, what was it like? He goes, oh, it was the greatest community. Like everyone was friends. It was so friendly. Everyone helped each other out. It was just like, it was such a tight community. And the guy at the gas station goes, I think you're going to love it here. It's just like that. And yeah. And I think true, there is an aspect of like, you make it what
you do.
You bring.
You do. But I think the one thing that I've always said that I've been so fortunate, both districts. I mean, I've gotten to choose the districts that I'm in, and in both districts that I've been a part of, just were so great. Like I'm a pretty positive person, but there was definitely differences between the district that I came from and this district. And the one thing about Fenton is it's a very special place in the fact that it's just big enough of a district to have all the resources that a kid would want and need, but it's still a real small town environment. Like, Friday night, the biggest thing going in this town is that football game still, even though we're kind of an up and coming area, and we've determined, we're a little bit of a foodie area now because we have several restaurateurs that have come into our community, but still it's that small town feel. I mean, there's times where I love walking into our local grocery store and seeing 5 or 6 families that I know. There's times where I hate it, right? And then I just choose to go somewhere else if I don't want to be on. But the majority of the time, it's a great place to be. I think you'll hear a lot of people say that, and sometimes, it's that positive spin on things, and it is the perspective that you put into something. But this is a special place for sure.
Yeah. So, it's such an interesting dynamic. So, is your husband a superintendent of a neighboring district then?
Right next door, our competitive
Okay.
district right next door. Yeah.
So, are there things that you can't share with each other? Like,
Oh, for sure. It's funny because we have a fairly tight county superintendents association, and some of the other superintendents will be like, "Well, Fenton's doing this. Heidi didn't talk to you about that," and he's like, "No, we try really hard not to talk about work." Um, because that's the other thing. We have
yeah.
great lives outside of our jobs. Like, we have 2 great kids. We get to travel a lot. Our kids keep us very busy, and we have a great family support system. I mean, when you have a good family outside of that and a good life outside of that, you don't necessarily need to drag work home all the time. There's times where we have to. There's times because we work together on a lot of things. We have a consortium. There's times where we have to, or we're in meetings. Like, I'll be in a meeting with him tomorrow. So there's times where you have to, but you try real hard not to, just because, I mean, this job, you have to eat, breathe, and sleep it enough. You don't want to have to when you're in your own downtime too. So,
yeah. So what are the things right now? And just to give the listeners a perspective, we're sitting here in mid-April, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
I had to check myself for a second. What are the things that are keeping you up at night, or the things that you're like battling or planning for right now? What's on your plate right now?
I think school safety. School safety is a big thing. I met with we have 2 SROs, so I met with them and the lieutenant that's in charge of them this morning to talk about just, hey, these are the steps that we've taken so far to have safe and secure environments. Let's look at goal setting for next year. So, we're about 6-7 weeks to the end of the school year. We end that first week of June. And so this time of year is kind of getting some of your stuff wrapped up. Our strategic plan, we're in our second year of our strategic plan. So getting some of that stuff, hey, where are we at with those goals and what are we doing with that? And then just wrapping things up when it comes to kind of what you've set out to accomplish for this year. And then we start goal setting for next year already, so that going into the summer, we can that's our downtime to prepare. Like, the work in the summer is way different than the work during the school year. So, we try to have those goals in mind. So moving into June and July, we can prepare and get ready for everybody coming back.
Okay. At this point in the year, do you know, like, personnel changes, or are there surprises that happen, like in the summer, like kind of like what happened on your first one?
Yeah.
Is that pretty common?
Absolutely.
Is it, or do you kind of see things?
Well, it's funny because just when you think you have a plan, somebody will retire or somebody will take a job somewhere else. And I'm a huge succession planner. Like, I've seen the benefit that, having somebody in mind for a position can have on a district. We have not missed a beat from the previous superintendent to me. And so I want that again when I decide, I don't want to do this any longer, or I'm going to retire, or whatever it is that I'm going to do. I want to have some people lined up to take over. And so I have a whole org chart that has my succession plans for all of our administrative positions. We were lucky enough to have the board support a pipeline project so that we actually have some teachers getting their administrative certification through a pipeline. And then we have some, aides and people who might have just a little bit of college working towards their teaching degrees as well. So we've kind of developed our own pipeline, and then we're a part of the state pipelines as well. Like, I think right now I have a plan for next school year as far as my administrative team goes, right? And I know we usually have a retirement incentive. They have to let us know by the 1st of April that they're going to retire, and they get an incentive. So we know who's retiring. We know that type of thing. What we don't know yet is enrollment. So if enrollment is flat or stays the same, we'll probably attrit out some of those positions, and then we'll probably replace some of them. So there is that staffing timeline that we work on as well. We like to have Fenton. Again, I'm a little competitive, so I like to go out and get the very best. We've been a destination district for quite some time, but we used to get, 25 and 30 applications for a position. Now we're lucky to get 10 or 15. And so it's just different time frame of staffing. So we try to get out early. So we kind of scoop up the cream of the crop as soon as we can.
So if you had to kind of give an idea of like how much time you spend in certain aspects of the job, like how would that break out? And I know, like it can be done a variety of different ways. I'm just kind of curious to be like, where do you think you spend the majority of your time?
Well, it ebbs and flows. Lately, a lot of my time, because we just passed $123 million bond. So a lot of my time is caught up in bond stuff. So it's either, we just got done selling the bonds for the first series, all of the compliance, all the attorney meetings, all of that kind of stuff. And then we have a weekly bond meeting that we talk about the projects and what's coming up in that first series. So a lot of my time right now is in bond meetings.
Okay.
I would say, but that will change, right? Once the bond project gets up and going, I can kind of get back in the buildings a little bit because they kind of know that I'm in the buildings a lot. I love being around kids. I've got to get a kid fix at least once a week. And I'm usually in the buildings, all of the buildings at least once a week. Now I'm down to like 2 or 3 at least once a week. So
okay. And how many
buildings? I try to rotate them so they see me. The kids don't know who I am, but at least I want
they might.
Yeah, they do. A lot of the older kids do just because I've had their kids. I mean, the graduating class right now, the last graduating class was the last 6th graders I had. So, I knew them really well. Yeah. Now I know kids just based upon, I have 2 student leadership groups that I meet with. So I know those kids at the high school that come and meet and talk with me. And then I have a group at AGS that I've started to meet with the middle school too. So, and then all of the staff, I think, know me and I know them fairly well. I mean, we employ about 380.
Okay. And how many buildings are in the district?
6.
Okay.
So I have 6 buildings. I have 3 K-5, a middle school, a high school, and an early childhood center. Okay. So, typically I can walk down the hall and call people by name. So that's important to me. I don't want people to feel like they never see me. So, I'm there. And then now as budget, we're, wrapping up this year's budget and starting next year's budget and looking at kind of the dollars and cents of it. The other thing that I spend a ton of time on is just HR. HR has a tendency to kind of be, a big beast. And I have a executive director of human resources and finance. But there's times where you just have to double team it just because there's things that you don't want to. You want to treat people with dignity, but you also want to hold them accountable. So,
yeah. How much like external thing? Well, obviously, if you had the bond stuff, there'd be a lot. That was a lot of external.
Yeah. No, you mean like, yeah. Okay,
yeah. So, like things like around the community of just feeling like absolutely. I need to be the face and be out there. Yeah.
Yep. So, I'm a part of the Chamber of Commerce board. So I meet monthly with them. So I'm on that chamber board. And then any of the activities that come along with that. There's activities, there's a celebration dinner that we go to as a part of the chamber. We have a very active foundation in our school district. So I sit on that board and then I sit on several subcommittees of that board. So a lot of times when I'm out in the community, they'll see me. It's involved not only with the school district, but with our foundation. And then, it's a fairly small community, so we know each other, right? So we, if I need something, I'll call up somebody that I need and say, hey, I need some resources. Like, for example, we have a local car dealership. He's not local, but statewide. He has quite a few car dealerships, and I'll call him and say, hey, I need 9 cars for homecoming, or, so we're constantly talking about, sadly, I usually go to those people when I need something, but they can always call me if they need something as well. But
Yeah.
We have a very active community. So that's
Good.
hugely beneficial to my job.
That's good. Well,
Yeah.
so a lot of our listeners are active school leaders, or like we call them somewhere change makers. It doesn't matter what their title is, but they're in schools and they're working.
Yeah.
But we also have a lot that are supporting like schools. So the architects and the vendors.
100%. Yeah.
Well, I mean, what are the things that you wish like they understood? And I say I fall into that category too. I was saying like we're here to help you.
Right.
Provide the best opportunities for your kids and for the community.
Yeah.
The whole, but what did you wish that we knew?
The job, not necessarily my job, but the job of the people that work for us is so hard. I mean, it is just such a hard position to be in, whether you're a building principal, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a bus driver, whether you're a food service worker, you're a head cook, whatever it is that you're involved in education is twice as hard as it is in the private entity. That's what I wish people really knew, because they not only balance the position that they do, right? Like you can be a head cook somewhere, but that head cook is also balancing it with, okay, I have these 15 kids that are on free lunch and, I don't have what I need for them. So they have to balance the human factor of taking care of kids on top of doing the position that they've been hired for, right? So that's what I wish people would know in the private sector, is just how tough this job is. Nobody in education makes enough money to do what they do. I mean, that is just factual. It's not even an opinion anymore. It's factual. I have 3 degrees, and if I were to take my 3 degrees to the private sector, it would be amazing how much I could make as a chief executive officer, because that's essentially what I am.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, like what's your budget just in comparison?
$42 million.
Yeah. So you take a $42 million company, that's a sizable company where,
Right. Yeah. So I think that's what I would like people to realize is just, we've chosen this. I chose to do what I do. I chose to take my 3 degrees and make the measly CEO salary that I make. I chose that. So I'm not saying that, just, have a little understanding of, how tough our jobs are, so that when you hear, one of our outliers did something horrible, don't assume that's all of us,
Yeah. All right. So as we're wrapping up, I have like so many more things I could ask you, but I want to respect your time here. But that's a really good point. Like, how do you, and I also want to get perspective, because how old are your kids?
So I have a 19-year-old and 20-year-old. He just turned 20 and a 15-year-old who will almost be 16.
Okay. Do you think either one of them is going to go down an education path?
I wish both of them would consider it, especially my oldest. I think he's got the perfect mentality for it. I think he could be very good, but he looks at, okay, my parents were in debt for how long, and they made this much money. And I think he thinks that I could probably get that same kid-based scenario by doing something, because he's heavily involved in sports as well. So he could do something in sports that wouldn't necessarily be education, but I hope so. I don't deter them at all.
Okay. That's good to hear. Because sometimes people are like, I don't want them following my path.
It's been an awesome life for me. I cannot, as much as I deal with some of the crap that comes as a superintendent, I shouldn't say crap, as much as I deal with the dilemmas that happens in superintendency, it's been an awesome life for me. I could not have picked a better profession to be, to have kids, to, be around kids, to be around positive people all the time. It's been a good life for sure.
All right. So I have 2 more questions. But I want to get your take on this, because just hearing this conversation, it's so easy to see how much you care, and that you're balancing a whole bunch of things in a really healthy, like positive way. How do you handle the negative? Because like, if I just Google, like there's articles and things that you see on social media, and How do you handle that just at a personal level?
Again,
And and I don't want to cut you off. There's not horrible things. Don't go Google her
trust me.
name
No,
and do
I
like
know.
the horrible
Trust me,
stuff.
you'll see a lot.
But there's just like stuff where
Yeah.
like you were graded at effective and somebody, and there's a public comment that's like, well, why isn't the public input? I would not have given up. Like stuff like that. Like, how does that affect you?
You get, once you become a leader, you get pretty thick skin. Like there's definitely been times where you get thick skin. And I think really, and I will tell you, last year was rough. But I look back and I'm grateful for it because there's so many things now. Like last year, I lived in some of those negative comments and I was so like, okay, this job is not for me because I can't deal with people who aren't good to kids or who aren't in it for kids or who are making public comments that aren't kid-centered, right? I can't take it. But as long as that negative stuff was on me, I was okay. As long as they're leaving the kids alone, and they were going after the kids pretty good last year. So I had to kind of do something to kind of get their attention and pull that negative energy back on me. And then I'm just in a better place this year about it. Like I know I'm a good person and I know what I'm doing is good for kids and I know what I'm doing for the district is good. And I know I'm making great decisions for our financial future. I know I'm doing a lot of good things, right? So you have to live in that kind of, it doesn't matter what those, internet trolls say, because they're always going to be there. I mean, that is just the culture that we live in now. So let's just stay the course and keep doing the good things that we're doing for kids. Yeah. And that will kind of see you through some of that. That is crap. I'll call it crap. That is crap on there. That'll kind of take you through that a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's a good perspective, but I know it's hard.
Oh, it is
to go through it. And
I think the hardest part is when your kids see it. Mm-hmm. Like when my kids were seeing some of those negative comments, and they wanted to go to these.
Yeah, they see how hard you're working and your intent behind it.
Yeah, that was hard. That was like, okay, maybe I don't want to subject my kids to that, my own children. But it gets easier, and they've gotten tougher too, so.
All right, so let's end on a positive. What are you what are the things you're seeing that you're like, we're doing the right things and we're on the right track?
Yeah. I'm so optimistic about just our future in Fenton and kind of the financial security that we currently have. That's awesome. I mean, we have made some great decisions and we're in a great spot. The community has supported us with this bond. I'm very excited about all of the legacy changes to facilities that will last well beyond me, right? That will last for, centuries. So that's really, I'm super pumped about that. I'm also pumped that the state is starting to make a turn and starting to kind of invest in education in a statewide situation. I mean, we're starting to see increases in pupil funding and starting to look at how schools are funded and how underfunded they are. And then how is that relative to how you want us to perform, right? So if you're going to really want us to perform well and in that top 10 in the country, you have to fund us like those top 10 states are. So I think there's some turn with that. So I'm excited about that. The other thing is, some of the young teachers that we've hired are freaking-tastic. They are so
That's
good.
Great to hear.
Yeah, they are so good.
What are those characteristics that you're seeing from the younger?
Patience, kid-centered. They have a better knowledge of assessments, and they have a better knowledge of what it takes to really get a kid to a certain point than we ever did. I mean, we didn't have any solid training in some of the things that they're now getting solid training in. Now, there's some things that they're not as good at as we were, as kind of veteran people who've been around. But I truly think some of the things they've got are better than the things that we had and we can teach them. So I think some of the young people that we've hired are just fantastic. in my district, what I'm excited about is there's people who are talking about taking those secession places, right? So we haven't kind of shown them how horrible the job is enough for them not to sign up for it. Does that make sense? So we have young teachers who want to be building principals, and we have some building principals who want to move into central office. So we're having kind of those succession planning conversations as well. And I think that's exciting, because I think anytime a district can plan for that next leadership role is great, because you don't miss a beat. You really don't. So those are some of the things that I'm very excited about and coming. And really, I'm excited to the next step. I mean, I'm going to retire here probably in the next 5 or 6 years. So I'm excited about what that looks like after retirement, because I eat, breathe, slept. I mean, when I was a teacher, I was a coach, when I was, so when I wasn't at school, I tell the story that when my son was born, I was assistant principal, and I had him in one of those bucket seats, that you have them, counted them all everywhere. And
yeah,
I took him to a home basketball game as an assistant principal, and he was in his bucket seat sleeping. And the whole student section had these big thunder sticks, and they were like clapping these thunder sticks. And it was just, the student section was going crazy. And here my kid is just conked out on the bucket seat. So I think the other thing that's so exciting about education is that we're allowing women, we're allowing men to bring their kids to school, to bring their kids to work. If you want to take a leadership role, we'll make it work. You're a family person, you can have a family and still have a leadership role. So I think, thankfully that was given to me, and hopefully that will be given down to several leaders, because there's no way I would become a principal if I couldn't have kids or have my own family. So that's exciting too.
Yeah. Well, that's great to hear. Yeah, those are all positive. I love hearing that from your perspective. Thank you for your time.
Anytime.
Yeah, I love these conversations. Thank you for going. We talk about the top 5 and bottom 5% of being able to talk about that.
Yeah.
I think too many times we don't see the real people behind it, and it's easy to point and be like, oh, what are they doing? They don't know what they're doing. And when you really dig in,
everybody's working really hard. Everybody's working really hard. I'll just leave with this other thing is, the one mission that I have, when I walk into a room of superintendents, there's not a lot of women, I will say. And there's a whole lot of women that are teachers, and there's a whole lot of women that are building principals, but we've got to convince the next generation of women to go into this role, because we do have a lot to give. And so, but I do see that kind of getting better. Hopefully it gets even better and better and better. But I would love to see more women take on the role of superintendents or chief executive officer of school districts. I think that would be awesome.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, for the listeners, if you have not already hit subscribe, just wherever you're listening, just hit subscribe. BetterLearningPodcast.com is the hub for everything on the podcast. So if you go there, we'll have show notes and things in each of the episodes, but it's also a place to put in suggestions for future topics or guests, whether it's you or other people. So
that's awesome.
Make sure you can go to that. And Heidie, just really appreciate your time. It's great talking to you.
Thanks for reaching out. I appreciate it.
The views and opinions expressed in the Better Learning Podcast are those of myself as an individual and of my guest, and do not necessarily represent the organizations we work for, the Association for Learning Environments, K-12, Education Leaders Organization, or Second Class Foundation.